Monday, August 12th. We will start with the special meeting. Will all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? And as always, we begin our meeting with the acknowledging the land on which we gather as the territory of the Ottawa and Chippewa peoples who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Thank you for your strength and resilience in protecting this land and inspiring us to uphold our responsibilities to do the same. We'll now continue, and I'll hand it over to Sarah, our Deputy City Clerk, for our roll call.
Commissioner Stanley?
Here.
Commissioner Werner?
Here.
Commissioner Treadwell?
Here.
Commissioner Shaw?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilson?
Here.
Commissioner Anderson?
Here.
Mayor?
Here. Okay, and we will begin now with our first act, which will be to do a declaration, a proclamation for Coast Guard Appreciation Month. And I'll be joined up at the podium.
You're good.
I get you the reading part, and then we'll have you talk. So we'll begin with the proclamation. Whereas in 1790, the Revenue Cutter Service was established under the jurisdiction of the Treasury Department, which later combined services with the United States Life Saving Services to form the Coast Guard in March. And in March 2003, the Coast Guard was transferred to the newly created Department of Homeland Security, where it remains today. Whereas at all times, the Coast Guard is an armed force, a regulatory agency, a humanitarian service, a federal law enforcement agency, and a member of the intelligence community, and is responsible for the safety, security, and stewardship of this nation's waters. Whereas each year, the Coast Guard conducts on average more than 17,500 search and rescue missions, saving over 3,400 lives and $47 million in property, all while protecting our borders through its drug interdiction efforts, keeping more than $3 billion worth of illegal drugs out of the United States. Whereas the City of Traverse City is proud to continue its support for the men and women of the Coast Guard and for Air Station Traverse City. Founded in 1945, the air station has undergone many changes. Today, the air station has over 115 active duty members and boasts 3 MH-60T Jayhawk helicopters that cover thousands of miles of coastline across the Great Lakes. And whereas the men and women of the air station embody a rich tradition of honor, respect, devotion, and duty, and dedication to service. By maintaining a constant 24/7 ready status, the members of the Air Station Traverse City remain poised to respond by supporting local law enforcement, other military services, and international, federal, state, and local partners to ensure the safety of our community. Whereas the members of the Coast Guard Committee are our friends and neighbors, their families are teachers, leaders in our local businesses, and engaged members of our community. They're coaches for our children, selfless volunteers, and the neighbors we have over for a barbecue, hopefully. Therefore, be it declared, I, Amy Shamrow, Mayor of the City of Traverse City, proclaim the month of August as Coast Guard Appreciation Month in the City of Traverse City and urge my fellow citizens to join me in thanking all those serving in the United States Coast Guard and recognizing the significance of their presence in our community. And this is a very thorough proclamation. I'm very glad we have this for you. So I didn't say a ton, but we are just always grateful to have you and the base here in town. And the Air Command does so much work for us all year round and for our whole region along the water. And we are just blessed to have all the water that we have around us and have you all helping us protect it. So I'll let you say a few words here. Sarah's already out there.
Thank you very much, Mayor Shamrow. It's a pleasure to be at Air Station Traverse City. This is such a welcoming community to all of our members. It's a very highly sought after unit across the Coast Guard aviation community and even the surface community. So it's an honor to be here. Thank you for having us and for this proclamation, and the 110 members of Air Station Traverse City appreciate the acknowledgement and the support that the community provides.
Thank you for joining us tonight, and I hope everybody remembers to invite you guys to the barbecues in the future.
Me too.
Okay, we will now move on to, I'm still leaning in like it's working, announcements from the city manager.
Oh, I'm leaning in too. Thank you, Mayor Shamrow. We will be removing items 7 and 8 from the agenda this evening. They will be brought back at a later date.
All right, and then announcements from the Deputy City Clerk, please.
Meetings scheduled for this week are Traverse City Light and Power will meet on Tuesday, August 13th at 5:15 here in the chambers. The Board of Zoning Appeals will meet on Tuesday, August 13th at 7 p.m. in the committee room. The DDA Board will meet this Friday, August 16th at 9 a.m. in the chambers. And always, we're looking for people to submit applications to serve on one of our boards and commissions, so please get those into us. And then, just as a reminder, we do issue a weekly e-newsletter, the Bay Brief, that covers the latest scoops on all the city news.
Thank you for that. And anybody checking out the agenda, there's a communication from City Manager Vogel about some work she's doing with the Recreational Authority. So that's in there, but that will be a topic of discussion at a future meeting in the not too distant future. So now we'll move on to our special meeting topics, and we're going to start with the CBGC, I always mess those up, sorry, discussion and analysis for us, please. And I'll hand that over to you, Liz.
Oh, thank you. This evening, we have Leslie Stickerman with the Planning Department here, and this is the public hearing for the CDBG funds. And I'll just turn it over to Leslie, and then Leslie, can you introduce who's joining us via Zoom?
Yes, I think we have all of our technical difficulties ironed out this time around, and we have Jason Smith from Wade Trim joining us remotely. He's been helping us through this process for our first year in this new program and making sure we're dotting all the I's and crossing the T's and getting it right. We're coming in just under the wire to get this submitted to HUD by the end of the week. And I did provide you in your packet a kind of summary of what the plan does and what our first and 5-year funding looks like. And in addition to Jason, who's going to give us sort of an overview and answer any questions, we have a couple of people in the audience who we've been working closely with from the Coalition to End Homelessness and Goodwill. I think they'd like to also add a little bit about how this program will help in their efforts. So hopefully we can all hear Jason, and I'll hand it over to him. Hang on, I think we're turning you up a little.
Try again.
How does it sound now?
Perfect.
Great. Opportunity to work with the city of Traverse City on this first year CDBG consolidated plan. So we're gonna challenge. So we're gonna make sure that everyone can say CDBG really quickly. I know that the alphabet soup with the program can be tough, but
Just say the name.
I've been helping communities out throughout the country with these programs for the last 20 years of my career. Traverse City being the first one that I've assisted that has been on year 1 of their program. This is the first time I've gone through this process, so it's been a learning experience for me as well. So one of the things that was important through this 5-year consolidated plan is to reach out to the public and get some input, not only from stakeholders, but also the community and staff and the commission, and try to identify what the needs are in the community to help better steer our federal dollars. And this being the first year that the city's embarking in this program, we felt it was important to also provide some flexibility in the plan, which I believe that we've done, because we will be going through a process annually to allocate dollars. Priorities from year to year, but I just want to make sure that was clear that this plan, I believe we have addressed the priority needs that we've heard from the public and through our survey. I believe we've also allowed some flexibility as we move forward. The priority needs, as I mentioned, these are really the things that we hear process, and these things were very loud and clear to us. Affordable housing and housing services, also assistance for homeless services and homeless facilities. Also, public services related to this, to seniors throughout the community. We have an aging population, not only in Traverse City, but throughout the country. So these types of programs have become more and more important. Also, the program administration component, of course, we always add that in because these were really the main themes we heard: homelessness, housing, and senior services. And that's kind of the bulk of how we frame the goals within our program or with our consolidated plan this year. Now, as I mentioned, each year as we go through the process, we'll be selecting specific projects for the 2024 program year, which technically starts on July 1st. So we are about 45 days. A lot of different things, and which is not necessarily the city's fault. A late allocation announcement from the feds has delayed the whole country on starting their program year. So our program year is going to be a little shorter than usual. We have right now programmed in our 2024 action plan shelter upgrades and capacity support for homeless services. Also, some funding available for rental unit construction, working through housing providers to provide rental units that are affordable within the community, affordable and accessible. Rental assistance also. So I feel these programs all fit those priority needs we discussed, the homeless services needs and the housing needs that we have throughout the community. So that's what we're currently proposing for 2024 as we move through the process. Now, I know that there's probably a lot of questions about, what if we change our mind? What if things change as we go on? There is always ability to amend plans. Of that, we do have the ability to add new projects later on in the funding year. The process we'll need to go through that requires public involvement, requires the approval from the city commission. So as we go through and we learn, this is going to be a learning process, I think, for the city, and we figure out what programs work, which programs are really needed. You do have that flexibility to make adjustments as time goes on. So today I'm here for questions, answer any questions you do have about the plan, about the process. What we're asking for today is not only a public hearing, but also the approval from the commission to allow the city manager to sign all appropriate forms. Our deadline is August 16th, so we are, as Leslie mentioned, we are cutting it pretty close. But as long as we have everything completed, signed, and submitted by the 16th, we should be okay in receiving our CDBG grant for 2024. So that's my quick overview of the plan. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Now, usually for a public hearing, we'll do public hearing first for the public and then have the commissioners, but because we have you on Zoom here, I'll open up to the commissioners that might have any questions. All right, go ahead, Jackie.
I think that I have a somewhat of a response from an email that arrived late this afternoon, but I was interested to understand how many potential CDBG recipients provided public feedback. And apparently we don't know that. It wasn't asked during the survey process. I'm wondering, how can we fix that for future years? I think that would be really valuable information to have.
I guess I'll start that, and you can jump in, Jason. We kind of relied on Wade Trim in their sample survey that they put together that hits all of the marks and asks the pertinent questions. We didn't ask people who were answering what their eligibility status might be or what their household income was, but we did ask them whether or not they were city residents. And, some of the people answering had different perspectives. They might have been, representing one of our stakeholder groups or one of our community partners, or have some other stake or opinion, and that specific question wasn't asked of them. But we did have well over, I think it was 300 respondents, which was really good. outcome and good input that we received. And I'll let Jason explain why we don't ask more about income of those answering.
So I think as the city begins to be more familiar with the program, what different stakeholders there are in the community, service providers and agencies that really work with, I guess, the CDBG eligible population, which would be the low and moderate income population, seniors, other special needs populations, that you'll improve over time in understanding who you need to reach out to specifically to reach the target populations. We worked through that. We worked on that this time around through our focus group meetings, and get the information to those who work for service agencies that are helping out and working day to day with their target populations. I think that in the short time frame that the city had we had a few months really. I think that getting that 300 or so survey results, along with the public meetings that were held, focus group meetings, I feel like that was in a short period of time a pretty good response. But I would encourage in future years that we identify an interested parties list, these agencies and service providers that are working with our target populations, and really engaging them to try to gain more input from those CDBG eligible populations.
Tim, you had your hand up?
The last sentence answered my question, because it was along the same lines. Just I get it that there was limited time, but so much in the plan, I read through it, talks about public meetings and public engagement, and there was extremely little. Like we are essentially counting our meetings as public meetings, and yes, there's public here, but not a lot of folks that qualify for funding from CDBG opportunities. So I get it. Time was short, but I do hope that in the coming year, and you seem to address it in your final sentences, so thank you.
Oh, go ahead.
If I could ask a follow-up. Leslie, I bet you could tell us who some of the community partners were who helped to set priorities?
We did kind of a broad outreach to all of the service providers, including Coalition to End Homelessness, Goodwill, the shelters, sorry, I know I'm forgetting a lot of people, the Community Action Agency, Homestretch, the Housing Commission, and I'm sure a few others as well.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to make a point that, and I agree, I appreciate that the comments for the next few years of this after this year with the difference in time will be I see more outreach, but I think we have to give credit where it's due with the partners that we did work on. I think a lot of people who are going to be the most in need of these services are also talking to people at Community Health, they're talking to people at Goodwill, they're caseworkers as from the wraparound services, things like that. And that is where those organizations are getting their information. I think sometimes when we talk about partners, we talk about groups or agencies, it can seem like a monolith, but a lot of these groups that we work with on housing and homelessness issues in particular, and seniors, are people who are literally on the ground with the people using the services every day. And I think that's important to delineate when we're talking about this in public, that this isn't just a paper pusher, I think is what people think a lot of the times, that there are people, or they have the feedback of the people who are talking to people who are actually using the services. Go ahead, Mai.
And frankly, with respect to the unsheltered population in our community, I think having those stakeholder organizations and service providers be speaking on behalf of the service recipients is a very valuable tool, because I can speak from the experience of the organization I work with that the unsheltered population is rightfully very reticent to trust in sharing their experiences and their needs. And Goodwill has the track record and the staff who is well trained to be able to understand and address the needs of the unsheltered population in specific to Traverse City's community. So while I recognize in the future having folks from the unsheltered community at the table would be very helpful, building the rapport in order to get folks from the unsheltered community to feel comfortable doing so takes a lot more than the 3 months or so that we had to put this together. So I really want to commend the organizations that did that work for us. So thank you.
Go ahead, Tim.
Just to help, not the public here necessarily, but if anybody's watching it at home, a lot of the focus of this plan is unsheltered citizens and people maybe on the ragged edge of becoming unsheltered, but the CDBG funding eligibility goes all the way up to 80% of AMI. And so while yes, I agree that there could be some discomfort in approaching, there's this huge portion of our citizenship that's eligible for programs that could be funded through CDBG, and we're not making an effort to reach out to them. And so that I hesitate to put everybody into one package. Certainly there will be folks that are unwilling or hesitant or just not comfortable to interact with this, but there's got to be folks out there in that very large range that would be. So I hope in the future we can reach out to them. I mean, in the document, it over and over states how valuable it was to work with stakeholders and meetings with the public to determine areas of need. So we're saying that we worked with the public, so let's actually do it.
Any other questions at this time? Well, we've got our Zoom hot. Go right ahead, Jackie.
Sure. I noticed that we have almost maxed out the 20% of budget that's allowable for administration. And I just wondered if you could give us some examples of what sorts of things the administrative budget covers.
So for this first year, the administrative portion is mostly committed to our work with Wade Trim. So we're not charging off any of the time for, city staff toward this. It's not covering anybody's salaries. It's to help us get started with the technical support that we need from Wade Trim. In subsequent years, you'll notice there's a much smaller number for that. So we'll continue to keep them on speed dial, but hopefully we'll be able to do most of it on our own. And I'd also like to just point out that we have weekly calls or bi-weekly calls with the people in the HUD field office in Detroit, and they're a great source of information and a check on what we're doing as well.
Any other questions from the commission? Okay, we've never really done this with a Zoom going on, but I think I have to officially open the public hearing. So Leslie, thank you. We'll have you sit for now. So I will open this public hearing. There will be a chance for commentary. Just to remind people, because I know sometimes for public hearings we get people who don't come to a lot of meetings. This is about the CDBG funding, so Community Development Block Grant funding specifically. It is a broad topic, so if there's things under that umbrella, you're welcome to speak about it. These are not Q&As. We can't just sit back and have a conversation, so please do feel free to come up, say your thoughts. Those will all be factored in and be all heard and entered into the record of who spoke. So with that, I don't have my gavel for this one. I will now open the public hearing.
I'm going to read the public comment rules. We ask that you state your name and address, indicate if you're a city resident, non-city resident, and/or city business owner. We have a 3-minute time allotment per speaker. When your time has elapsed, the timer will beep, and we finally request that all language be respectful to all parties.
All right, so anybody who'd like to, please approach the podium, and you'll have a couple minutes to speak.
Justin Reed, 630 Cottage Drive, apartment 1B, a Traverse City resident. Just want to say I'm for this, and that the startup fee for all this, the 20% of the administration fee, that's normal. That's normal with any business that you start up with. There is going to be administrative cost, and hopefully it's after this year it can be more sustainable. So thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Any other? Going once. Okay, with that, I will now close the public hearing. There we go. So we'll bring it back to the commission. We have a motion. We have we can have our, bring it back for our discussion. Don't we have a motion?
We didn't
Oh,
have a
yeah,
motion.
sorry, there is a motion. We're at some, what, there is one in here. Well, that's,
Nobody made it.
oh, no, I'm saying we can
yeah.
take, we have a motion here, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, we got into a very technical discussion here very quickly. So we do not have a motion made, but we have one to make in our packet to clarify where we're at. So we can bring it back. You can't, don't usually do a motion before we have the public hearing. So now that the public hearing is closed, that can be made from the floor. Go ahead, Tim.
I'll make the motion that the City Commission adopts the 5-year comprehensive plan for the Community Development Block Grant and the analysis of
Oh,
the
yeah.
analysis of impediments of fair housing choice, and that the city manager be authorized to execute any necessary documents to certify the City Commission's adoption of the comprehensive plan.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Mark. All right, so open that up for discussion. Go ahead.
Just 3 quick things. One, I also asked the city manager, this actually came up in the meeting that Commissioner Shaw and I had with Leslie Sichterman and the city manager 2 weeks ago, about how the CDBG plan as a puzzle piece fits in to the permanent supportive housing efforts of not just the city but the community, and whether we as a city commission and as a city then intend to be part of the 2028 goal to end chronic homelessness. And so I'm hopeful that that will be on a agenda soon for a discussion here. Like, is that something we're willing to slap hands on and say, yeah, we want to be part of that 2028 goal? Because we've seen that, but we haven't discussed it. Like, are we willing to be part of that? So I hope we can have that discussion. And then on page 106 of the plan, there's a section about public property for housing or public property for use in this plan. In the years 2019 or so till 2022, there were a lot of discussions by the City Commission about underutilized city property to be used for housing, but it's not addressed in the plan. The plan says, yeah, we'll use public property for parks and other things. I'm hopeful that that will circle back around at some point in the future, whether it's Beitner and Woodmere again or something else, but there were a lot of pieces of property that had been potentially identified. And then finally, I'd like to thank Leslie Sichterman for all of her responses. I know I can come across as grumpy and asking too many questions, but she made a fantastic effort to answer all of my questions earlier today, so thank you.
Commissioner Warner, any other questions, thoughts? All right, and just because we also have someone on Zoom and we have Leslie here, anybody need any final comment, or we think we've covered that well in your opinions? I don't see any takers. Okay, with that, then I will open this motion up for public comment. So again, this is now the public comment period on the motion instead of just the public hearing, if anybody would like to speak. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you all. I'm very excited for staff and our community members to get this project started and keep running with this new funding. It's always great when we can find new funding. Do we need to do anything with? Giving Sarah a moment to take our technical efforts. Okay, now, because this was a special meeting, we didn't really do a consent calendar, so you'll see some items on here that would normally be on a consent calendar and might not be brought up. There's no red alert on these, there's no flags being raised. It's just, rather than having a calendar of like 2 items, we decided to just have everything on the agenda and go through it. So we are now on to the exciting world of diesel fuel. Does anybody have a question or want to make a motion?
I move that the city manager be authorized to issue a confirming purchase order in the amount of $24,090.50 to Scotland Oil for 10,000 gallons of ultra-low diesel fuel, sulfur diesel fuel for city operational use, with funds to come from the garage fund.
Thank you, Commissioner Shaw.
Support.
Thank you, Commissioner Anderson. Any further discussion on this item? Go ahead, Tim.
I'll support it, but usually we don't get to talk about it because it's always on the consent calendar. But maybe in the coming 12 months, we could see, like, how's our usage been historically? Like, are we doing better? Do we use less? Do we use more? Just curious. Thanks.
And to let you know, Commissioner Warner, that did come up during agenda review for both the diesel and the unleaded discussion. So,
Thanks.
yeah, great minds. Any other comments on this? Okay, any public comment on this? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. So do it again with unleaded gasoline, please.
I move that the city manager be authorized to issue a confirming purchase order to Scotland Oil Company, Inc. in the amount of $23,673.50 for 10,003 gallons of unleaded gasoline for city operational use with funds available in the garage fund.
Support.
Thank you, thank you. Sean Anderson again. Any public comment on this? Any more comment from the commission? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Okay, the Streets Division asphalt purchase request here. Liz, it's got you on it, or did we want to hand that over?
I
Or
was
Frank?
hoping Mr. Deturi would speak to the asphalt if there were any questions.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions on this item, or just want to make a motion? Go right ahead, Jackie.
I have a question. I noticed that it looked to me as though the amount that we're spending this year, proposing to spend this year, is the same as last year. And I just wondered if that means that I can presume that there's a similar level of local street repairs planned this year as last. And if I'm assuming correctly, are we making kind of progress on overall improving the conditions of our local streets? And if I'm way off base, please, Frank, tell me.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear all of the question. Could you repeat part?
Sure. Because we're proposing to spend the same amount on asphalt this year as last year, can I presume that that means we're going to have about the same level of local street maintenance and repair as we did last year? And if so, is that amount enough to chip away at our backlog of local street maintenance? Are we making positive progress?
It's a difficult question to answer.
It
I'm not
is
sure if this
picking it
is
up on the
working or
TV.
not. Okay. We have a public-facing Paisley rating page that anybody, you can look up and you can see the conditions of your streets. And in general, what we try to do is we try to stay in the good to very good. The excellence or we're just rebuilt, right? And we try to, if we stay in that good range, we're trying to keep them from falling to poor or very poor. So a lot of it depends. That's why we do our Paisley ratings. We try to do them every year at about the same time so we can have a justified sample at about the same point in the year, understanding what we have to do for the next year. As far as the amount of pavement that we place down, I think this year we'll probably wind up with quite a bit more because Streets Division has been actively involved in larger than typical pavement projects along North Cass Street or along the Tart Trail along Parsons. We just did a 580, don't hold me for exactly the amount of feet on there, 500 and some odd foot along a section of trail that really falls outside of those smaller pothole patches, if you will, or smaller patches. What we try to do is have enough dollars to satisfy what we think we're going to be able to use in any given year, based on what we did in the past. Also based on some of the new roads that are either reconstructed. If we have new construction or repaving, that means there's several sections of roads that we don't have to touch for a couple of years. That's a good thing too. So we've been doing that. I don't think I'm really answering your question as well as I'd like to. But
Directionally, you are. Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you.
Ballparked it there. All right, do we have any more questions, or could I get a motion?
I'm just going to be Johnny on the spot here.
You are
So
helping
I
us all
move
tonight.
that the city manager be authorized to issue a blanket purchase order to Team Elmers of Traverse City in the amount not to exceed $50,000 with funds available in the Streets Department accounts here. Do I read all the numbers? 202, 202, 740, 00, 202, 203, 203, 740, 00, 101, 441, 740, 00, and 204, 204, 740, 00. And also that the city manager be authorized to issue a blanket purchase order to Mullen Asphalt, Inc. of Traverse City in the not-to-exceed amount of $20,000 for the purchase of asphalt on an as-needed basis, and in the event of an emergency with funds available in the following Streets Department accounts: 202, 202, 740, 203, 203, 740, 101, 441, 740, and 204, 204, 740,
Support.
Thank you, Commissioner Warner. Okay, any comments or questions from the commission on this item? Seeing none, any public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? And just for a note for staff, as we've done that, I think we wanted to know what accounts money was coming from, but maybe we could start putting those in the memo and the motion, leave them out of the motion so we're not reading whatever the numerical soup, I guess it would be, as opposed to alphabetical. That might help make it a little easier on everybody making the motions. All right, moving on, we've got a license transfer of ownership for a Class C liquor license. So this is going from Bahia to Bushell's, which is now in the same location. So this is not a new license, and it is the same location. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free, or go ahead and make the motion. Go ahead, Heather.
Yes, I
Oh, yeah,
have a
thank you.
professional relationship with Andre Bouchel, so I am going to recuse myself from this.
Okay, great, thank you.
I'll make the motion that the resolution recommending approval of the request from Runner LLC Bouchels to transfer ownership to it from Amarek Home LLC Bahia, the Class C liquor license, be adopted, and that the city clerk be authorized to issue a liquor license registration to Runner LLC Bouchels for it to operate all liquor licenses and permits at 127 South Union Street, Traverse City, Michigan 49684.
Thank you, Commissioner Stanley. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Wilson. Any further questions or comments on this item? Any public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back for a vote.
Sorry,
Uh-huh.
I had a
Sorry.
comment. And I appreciate that this is a transfer. This is not a net increase in our number of liquor licenses within the city. I did have questions about the SDM retail off-premise license, and I wondered about the location of the outdoor seating. Is that directly sidewalk facing street, or is it somewhere else?
Great questions.
The SDM. Yeah, we've got Sarah researching very quickly here.
Okay, then, while you're researching, I know that
Oh, wait, we've got,
Oh,
thank you,
look,
thank you,
someone's
thank you,
gonna
thank you.
help.
Man of the hour.
Man of the hour here, thank
magically
you.
add the
Didn't see you back
information.
there.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Can you restate that question, please?
I just was wondering if there was more detail available about the, I noticed that it's both a Class C license, but then also an SDM retail off-premise license, and I just wondered, tell me about the difference.
Okay, so the Class C license is just the standard full-service license transferring from the original restaurant that was there. The off-premise piece of it, I believe, with my other restaurants, it's packaging alcoholic beverages to go for consumption at home. Yeah, when it comes to the patio question, it's basically the patio permit that was approved for the 4 seats that will be have signage put up that no alcoholic consumption beyond this area.
Thank you.
Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, my name's Andre Bouchel.
And just really quick, just for everybody, you don't currently have a liquor license, but you have had the patio operating since, like the outdoor seating operating without liquor since
Yes.
you've opened, correct? So it's
Yes.
not, it's, the public's interfaced or interacted with it is really what I'm going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought so, just wanted to check. All right, any other questions? Well, we've got Andre up here. All right. Thank you very much for stepping up. I didn't
Thank
see you
you.
back there. It was a life-saving moment for the staff, I
Yeah,
think.
there you go. Thank you.
All right. I will open this up then. Any public comment on this item? I might already called for it, but since we've got some input here. Seeing none, I'll bring it back for a vote then. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. All right. Heather's free to come back. Okay, our next item is the West Front Street Safety Improvements Project. Liz, we'll have you lead on that.
Yeah, good evening, Commissioners.
Oh, no, sorry, we pulled this, didn't we? 6 and 7?
No,
Or was 7 and 8? Sorry, 6 was it?
So we've had some issues on West Front Street with some car accidents recently, and I don't know if you remember, but there was a homeowner who came to speak under public comment, I believe in January or February. It's a little foggy, but there was an accident that actually resulted in the vehicle going through the fence and into a shrub on his property. And as soon as staff actually went out and met with him shortly thereafter. We went out to see the property and the house, and so this is a result of retaining Hubble, Roth, and Clark to give us some options on how to proceed to make that area safer. And so you'll see your summary from our city engineer, Ann Pagano. And so the staff is recommending that the City Commission consider approval to amend the existing contract with Hubble, Roth, and Clark to add $20,655 for design and construction management for the safety improvements on West Front Street. And I guess for the people here today, it's where there's the turn in the road as you're sort of heading out of town, and there have been some issues there. So we are recommending moving forward with those safety elements.
Okay, any questions on this item or make a motion? Go ahead, Tim.
I would encourage us to set this aside maybe for a month and for members of the commission to take their time and go visit the site and have a look at it. Previous city commissions worked hard at the city limit there to make the improvements that are there with those large planters in the median, the stop sign at Madison. So those didn't used to exist. And to me, what's proposed by Hubble, Roth, and Clark is more something you would do on a highway, and maybe in the 20th century. We're in the 21st century, and it's not a highway. Speed limit's 25. It's a neighborhood, residential. I think we can do much better. And if you take a look at it, you'll see that if just the planters follow a curve, and you can see the new piece of fence where the accident happened, and if there were just 2 more planters in the same spacing that exists, it would have prevented that accident. So how about we look into, not we, but have the engineers look into something that is a little more Traverse City and a little less guardrail and steel looking. Not trying to Monday morning quarterback it, but there's been effort put into that edge of town already. I feel like it's giving up on it if we just say, yeah, put in some big highway signs and a guardrail. It's just, I think we could do better and, take a month, have a look at it, see what the other options are. That's all.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Commissioner Warner. Commissioner Stanley?
So shortly after the homeowner experienced that accident, he did reach out, and as one of the commissioners who lives in his neighborhood, I did go visit, and in those wintry conditions, happened to be a very icy morning, and I was slipping getting out of my car to meet him in his driveway. We did review exactly the issue with that stretch of road. It is 25 miles per hour there, but it's coming from 35, and shortly, not very much farther up the road, it's 55 miles per hour. And the homeowner had some very specific thoughts about the kinds of safety measures that he would like to see in that area. And unfortunately, as we're coming down a hill at 55 to 35 to 25 without some excessive warning and barriers, it's very likely that we will continue to see cars leaving the roadway. And this homeowner and father was very fortunate that his children were not, frankly, injured or worse during this accident. And so I would say, yes, it's not attractive, but neither are, buildings that are tagged downtown. Neither is the parking lot that's falling into the bay. But we accept some level of process And this is what is being recommended. And frankly, it's aligned with what the homeowner who experienced this tragedy was requesting from the city. So I'm certainly going to support this.
Okay. Well, before we get too much into a debate, would somebody like to make a motion?
I'll make the motion that this mayor and city clerk execute an amendment to the contract with Hubble, Roth, and Clark in connection with the West Front Street Safety Improvements Project to provide construction management and design services in the amount of $20,655, and that the city manager be authorized to manage a 10% contingency, which brings the entire engagement to $37,191, with such an amendment subject to approval as to its substance by the city manager and to its form by city attorney, with funds available in the traffic calming budget GL 245-245.
Thank you. Do a second?
Support for discussion.
Okay, thank you. And now we'll open it back up here. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, just in response, those planters, they're not your average planters like I would have in my backyard. These are substantial barriers to motor vehicles. In fact, I think that was part of the concern when they were installed is, are we allowed to put those there, or do they put drivers at risk? And so it's almost like they're on the border of being too substantial, but they're there, so they must have been approved. So I'd like to at least explore, could we add a couple of more? That's all.
And I'm asking, I think, staff and anyone else, we keep hearing about the planters being substantial. How embedded are they? Are they deep? No,
They're on the
just sitting
surface. They're not buried.
So we're putting something that's, when hit by tons by a car, will fall over?
Have any of the planters been hit?
I'm asking, is it embedded in something? Is it
No, they're not.
stationed in it? Okay, that was what I was asking. Do we have other questions or comments on
Yeah,
this?
like what's our ability to work with the surrounding, the immediate next municipality about the warnings coming down, some of those concerns coming in? Like we can, all this doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. Like we can do beautiful planters as well as, the safest rail possible, but then also about talking to our neighbors about what can be done for warnings coming down the hill and or considerations for slowing sooner.
Well, I think I'll go back to the conversations we had at Madison, when we had the Madison stop sign put in, and say we're always happy to talk to our friends at Garfield Township and County Road Commission if they ever want to come talk to us. And usually I say let's have a combined discussion, but these are very distinct areas, and people have driven eastbound, I can't remember if it's westbound, on that portion of the street there. We, in our territory, have the light that flashes warning you that you're going over speed. That's permanent there. So, our staff has tried to do. I remember the Madison argument that there's a light there at, there's like 4 roads that come together at that point. They have 4 different names by Olson's there. Yeah, and front though, and it's different on the other side. So, but that light is supposed to help slow people because in theory you'll get reds and then people will start up and they're not going 55 straight down it. But we don't control the timing on that light. So to my knowledge, I think, or do we? Is that our light? I don't think so. No, it isn't. I wanted to double check before I firmly said that. So to that, the answer to that is the door is always open. We've had some conversations periodically, but we've done what we can with our flashing light and discussing now some additional protections for that yard specifically. And to be fair to this conversation, that bend and that part are strictly in the city. So yes, people are coming in at 55, and it is, but this is on our turf, I guess you could say, to take care of. So, Mitch, go ahead.
Yes, going back to those discussions in 2020, or was it 2021, when we put in the 4-way stop, there had been some discussions about putting in, say, a stoplight there rather than just 4-way stops, but the city at that time, and I see since then, has said that for the vast majority of cases, the 4-way stop is meeting our goals. The proposal for a stoplight was largely proposed by people coming from the adjacent municipalities. Have they continued or raised that issue again?
Well, as I recall, the conversation at the time was request, as you mentioned, from outside, people living outside of our city requesting that, and no other jurisdiction wanting to chip in. And the city, as a city, because we have a four-way stop there and had our traffic engineers work on it, did not want to put in a light, nor did we think it was warranted. I haven't seen anything change that drastically in the numbers, and I have not heard of any offers coming forward to help us pay for something like that.
And frankly, a four-way stop requires that each vehicle coming down Front Street does reach a full stop, whereas if it was a stoplight, especially if that was synced with the one at Front and North Long Lake and Cedar Run and Medical Campus Drive, then you could have cars that are continuously going through and not slowing down.
That's a fair point. And also, I just want to make sure we're not losing sight in this conversation that we are discussing, though, just west of this,
Around the curve.
the four-way stop. So that just to refresh people's minds, this isn't the exact four-way stop debate, and this is not going in at the four-way stop. It's a little further west as it starts to curve.
Just providing some context
Yes,
about
I
the
do
existing
appreciate
previous
that.
discussions.
Heather, you had your hand up?
Yes, so when these planters were put in, I have to assume that they were judged to be equivalent to putting in a barrier, but it was an aesthetic decision to put something in that was not this big high-tech high. So really, all we want to do is extend that barrier. And you could take the planters out and put in an actual.
The planters are the barrier.
Right.
Are part of the
Yeah.
barrier.
But all we really need to do is extend the barrier.
Yeah.
So by adding a couple of planters. And it is equivalent to putting in the guardrail.
It would seem, unless the traffic engineers say, no, that here's why it doesn't qualify.
But we haven't heard that.
Right.
And that was, oh, go ahead, Jackie.
I just wondered, it sounds as though road conditions were a contributing factor to the incident that precipitated this conversation. Are there other directions that we could approach this from in terms of road conditions under hazardous conditions?
I will say that's what precipitated this discussion. However, I'll just throw in some anecdotal here, but I'm sure we could go look it up. As the child of a former paramedic and ER nurse, that curve has had its issues in all types of weather at all times of day, depending on where people are coming from and what they're doing. So I don't know that, I think this was the one that precipitated us to finally look a little bit more at what's there. But this, the planters didn't go in just because somebody said, let's put planters there. It's because that curve has always kind of had some issues. So not that we don't always look to improve on road conditions, but I think that this issue is, with this design is just always been a problem. I shouldn't say always, but it's been a problem for many years.
Since the planters were installed a couple years ago, has there been more than one incident of people crashing
Didn't we
into it?
receive that information earlier today? So when were the planters installed? And if they're looking that up, I will also add that the particular accident that precipitated this was a combination of winter weather and apparently substance use and a high rate of speed. I will also let you know that the homeowner's father is a traffic engineer, and the homeowner was specifically in our meeting requesting some visual verticality, that the planters are very attractive, but they are quite low, and if you're coming down the hill around the curve, there is very little vertical notification to you that you are changing so drastically your trajectory around that curve. So there were, again, yes, he is a homeowner. Yes, and I am hesitant to give over too much weight to the recommendations of someone who is not a hired expert by the city in the field. However, this is someone who has very close knowledge of such things and who experienced the outcome of it being not optimally designed, and was requesting the barrier of the guardrail as well as those kinds of vertical visual cues that were being discussed in this plan.
Do we have any staff available to discuss that? Because that is a point that I was wondering about yes, we want, at the end of the day, we want something that's going to protect people from having a car in their yard or in their home, or God forbid, hit a child or somebody that's living there. But the visibility issue or any of the design factors that went into this. Do we have anybody to discuss that today?
I mean, if you have any questions, I can get it to our staff.
Okay. Because that's, I mean, I'm looking at Hubble, Roth, and Clark's here, and they went down to, they obviously weren't doing an A-B comparison, but went into that this is the kind of recommendation on an issue, with an issue like that. So I guess that would be my concern as well is, yes, guardrails are old and dated, not dated, but they're old, but they are also very recognizable safety hazard alert as well. You're not driving through the mountains and seeing something pretty along the side of the road to warn you not to go off the edge. It's usually just a guardrail. So, I mean, we've done it, we did it at one point, so we have that option, I guess, to have that conversation. But right now we have a motion on the floor. So does anybody have any other questions before I open up for public comment?
Can we paint it?
Can we paint it?
Make it pretty?
Probably.
We could ask.
I probably have, I mean, I've seen neon ones, I've seen gray ones, and I've seen green ones. So,
Graffitied ones.
what's that?
Graffitied ones.
Oh, and art. Let's get the Arts Commission involved. There you go. All right, I'm going to open up for public comment on this item. So again, this is public comment on the West Front Street Safety Improvement Plan. Please go ahead and approach.
Really not why I'm here, but I happen to live right there, 1123 West Front Street, Russell Schindler. And I'm inclined to agree with Mr. Werner that a couple more planters would work there. I mean, I actually recall the debris and, I saw the police there when that accident happened, and it was somebody, that was under the influence. And I don't know, even a guardrail in some instances wouldn't stop that. So I think if you just put a couple more planters there, I do appreciate the stop signs, by the way, because I live right at that intersection. It's been, increased my ability to cross the street there. And then the speed limit sign, it actually reminds me that I'm going too fast sometimes. So I just, having seen it, I agree with Mr. Werner.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this item?
Justin Reed. Part of that discussion, could that planners be something that could be introduced into part of this process if this gets approved? Could that, the guardrail and planners be looked at both with this contract? That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll close public comment. City Manager Vogel, you were kind of reacting to the last question, so did you have a thought on that or an answer?
Well, I imagine once Hubble, Roth, and Clark is retained, that we can share the concerns of the community about the planters, whether or not it's appropriate to add more in addition to or in lieu of. I am not a traffic engineer, so I would, but I could bring all of the concerns. Aesthetics are clearly a concern, but safety is paramount, so we can ask them, are there ways to minimize the aesthetic that's typically not very pretty, that goes along with guardrails, but I think we need to share those with them once they've been retained so that we can get an understanding. I wouldn't be able to answer that unless I was sitting with a traffic engineer and telling them, about this meeting and some of the concerns that have been shared.
Thank you. Go ahead, Heather.
Yeah, I feel like the city invested in this. They may have invested about the same amount of money that we're thinking of investing again in something else, and that it actually seemed to work, except that it wasn't long enough. And as long as those planters have an equivalent crash resistance to a guardrail with some additional signage, I think that instead of throwing out something we just did a couple of years ago, that we just make it better and make it work better, because it has been working.
Any other comments, I guess, or past questions? All right, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Werner?
No.
Commissioner Treadwell?
Yes.
Commissioner Shaw?
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilson? Commissioner Anderson?
No.
Commissioner Stanley?
Yeah.
Mayor?
Am I allowed to ask a really quick question before I vote? Is this one where if I vote, if there's we need a no vote to bring it back, or can it be brought back in the future date? I'm voting no then, so that if we have some conversation with our friends at HRC, we could potentially bring it back before 6 months is up. So mark me as a no for that one. Okay, and I don't think we officially went through having a vote to change the agenda. I think I just usually have to let you guys know, and I didn't do that earlier. So unless there's objection, I'm going to use chair's privilege to skip 7 and 8, as was brought up by the city manager at the top of the meeting. Seeing no objections, we'll move on to number 9, consideration of reestablishing the Complete Streets ad hoc. This one has had some conversation. It started up many years ago, at this point, a couple of years ago. And it was requested by Commissioners Warner and Shaw to be brought back to this meeting. There's been some discussion among staff. There was some discussion at the agenda review. We have the option of reforming the committee right now, but looking at the staff burden load right now that they have, we talked about establishing it now, but potentially not having it meet immediately, because any ad hoc established has a 6-month window and then can always be renewed. So that was the discussion that's been had so far on it. I've seen some emails come through, so I know there'll be some commissioners wanting to discuss it. As I was part of that ad hoc, I will be adding some of my recollections as well. So I'll open it up first to see anybody have comments. Do you want to discuss this as a whole item before we go into it? Well, yeah, I guess first I would say volunteers. I will volunteer to be on it again.
I have a question about the Active Transportation Committee. Is it still in place? And if it is, who serves on that committee and what are some of its recent actions?
The Active Transportation Committee?
It's referenced in the documentation, isn't it?
So
It's an
if I
existing
might,
committee.
It is an existing committee?
Yeah, but not.
well,
this-
because I served on it as the city commission representative
Mhm.
since its establishment, and I'm pretty sure about the same time that the Complete Streets resolution was approved, December of '22, was about the same time that the Active Transportation Advisory Committee, I think it was called, kind of ceased to exist. It wasn't, it could have been correlated somehow. It wasn't a causation thing, though. It wasn't like, oh, we're starting this, we're ending that. It was just roughly that's about the time frame. Partly with this resolution, then also the mobility plan being worked on. It was thought to be a good transition time. That's my take.
Do we have any questions or volunteers for the Complete Streets?
I would volunteer.
We've got Mark, Heather, and we'll put Tim on it again since he was on the one before. Okay. Now, the one thing that I do want us to discuss, well, I guess I'll take a motion first. I had 3 people volunteer. Do one of you guys want to make the motion, or else it doesn't exist for a while?
Make a motion that the City Commission Complete Streets Ad Hoc Committee be established to develop a proposed Complete Streets policy with Commissioner Shaw, Commissioner Wilson, Mayor Pro Tem Wilson, and Commissioner Werner to be appointed to such committee, and
Pro Tem?
Mayor Pro Tem Wilson serve as chair, with the committee to expire February 12, 2025.
I support.
Okay. Got Werner and Shaw. And I wanted to open this up for some discussion now. I appreciate that Commissioner Warner will be offering some continuity from the last one, but there are two of us here that were also on the previous ad hoc. We had gotten quite far in discussions about rubrics, and I forget right now, I looked it up yesterday and have now totally forgotten the organization's guidelines that we were using as a kind of our guide, and we were working with Kyle, who was then with the engineering department on that, and had gotten quite a bit down the road on that. I wanted to kind of point out, though, that one of the things that I do remember about that ad hoc was Kyle was consistently there, but no other staff was. And I think it would be wise if we gave staff, especially Anne, as she's the new engineer, some time to catch up on what exists from that, summer projects, get the mobility plan through, and start it not next year. I mean, it expires in February. But I know often when we serve these, we then have the clerk's office reach out, and within a month or so, we're starting to schedule the first meeting. And I would hope that with the burden that we know we have with the staff and the continued effects from some of the unplanned issues we've had this summer, I could say it in Russian, and maybe that would make it more familiar, but that we would give staff a little bit of time to get caught up with the changes that we've had, both as city manager, engineers, and others involved in this project.
So starting in like October, something like that?
Mm-hmm.
Early October.
Okay. So I appreciate that. I appreciate that effort to get, let the engineer, the new city engineer, have some time with that, and also the mobility plan have some time to go through, and our other projects that we've been working on that I think will offer a lot of insight that we kind of kept going round and round a bit about with the last ad hoc. And to be fair, the last ad hoc did not give up. There was just a lot of transition going on at that time, so I just wanted to clarify that point too, that this wasn't some, stalemate or staff walking away from it, but we do have a lot of staff that will need to catch up now.
We had a lot of good progress come out of that, and that the rubric that was being worked on took a lot of staff and committee time to research and review. So I appreciate you asking for that grace period for our city engineer to be able to review those materials that, and I believe we renewed that. Did we already renew that ad hoc once? It was.
If we did, it might be up now, because I think it was just before the election in November, so.
Yeah, and it was created like January of '23 or something.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Tim.
But yeah.
Oh, it's older than that, I think, but,
I completely agree with Commissioner Stanley. Like, there was some significant progress made, and I had to remind myself. I did a quick search on my email just to try to see the dates, because I couldn't even remember necessarily, and what popped up was my reaching out to some folks that have advocated for this in our community, and in that email commending the ad hoc for the exceptional work that was being done, which was the mayor and Commissioner Stanley.
Yep, so I think that we'll get that all together and give them time to kind of see the work that was done and move forward with that. So I appreciate the new batch volunteering to take on the project, and we'll make sure that we can connect with some of the history of that as well. Do we have any other questions on this or comments before I open up to public comment? Seeing none, is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you all to our volunteers. So Mark and Heather and Tim. That's right. All right, and so what I'm going to do now is officially adjourn our special meeting, and I'm going to open up our study session. And the reason we did that, just so everybody understands, is there is no motion being taken on this. There's no action being taken on this presentation, and we wanted to close out anything that might indicate that there could be, and assure everyone that this is just a study session now. So I will open the study session and hand this over to Mr. Winters.
Mayor.
Oh, yeah.
Did you want a public comment to end that meeting?
Oh, yeah, sorry, thank you. I saw somebody up there,
I
and
didn't see it on here.
it's on there and I missed it. Actually, we do have some time right now really quickly, because we are closing out the special meeting for a general public comment before I open up I didn't, Sarah, just for the record, I haven't officially opened up the study session yet. Does anybody have any general public comment? Please go ahead and approach.
Russell Schindler, 1123 West Front Street. I'm here to address a critical issue in our neighborhood concerning the illegal campground, commonly called the Pines. It's become a growing problem over the past 5 or 6 years. The population of this encampment seems to double annually. As a result, the neighborhood has experienced an increase in litter, vagrancy, trespassing, violence, car break-ins, and this situation has escalated to the point where my own home was involved in a recent incident. On July 20th, we were woken about 4:30 in the morning by our dogs barking. We discovered a man on our second floor balcony just outside our bedroom after having gained entry into our fenced and gated yard, backyard. I confronted the intruder with my firearm, fearing for our safety, while my girlfriend called the police. Fortunately for all involved, the situation ended without violence. However, to our dismay, despite the intrusion, his trespass, and his suspicious behavior right outside our bedroom door, the police did not charge the intruder and allowed him to leave. This response highlights a troubling trend of police inaction and emboldens such behavior. The illegal encampment nearby has become a hotspot for police activity due to violence, overdoses, and other disturbances, yet the problem persists. Liquor bottles and litter are common sights, and I now avoid walking my dogs near this area due to confrontations, and I know other citizens do as well. They avoid that area. It's clear that this situation is getting worse, and it's not only failing to help the homeless, but it also degrades our neighborhood, leading to increased dangerous encounters, which will at some point end in tragedy. I urge the City Commission to reconsider its failing approach to this issue. The current experiment in homelessness accommodation is not working. It is not helping the homeless, and it's not helping the neighborhood. Instead, we need to enforce existing laws. Allowing in public encampment is not the answer. It only exacerbates the problem we face. The City Commission should encourage the city manager and the police department to enforce the laws more effectively. While I empathize deeply with the homeless and understand their struggles, it's important that our compassion doesn't overshadow practical solutions. Providing structure and enforcing rules can lead to better outcomes for everybody involved. If the encampment is cleared, many of the individuals will likely find better alternatives, which could ultimately improve their circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other general public comment at this time? Please feel free to approach the podium.
Sam Bender, 628 West 11th Street. I've written each and every one of you twice on the same issue that Mr. Schindler has spoken to you about. Ms. Vogel replied to me, and the CBDG document, just the fact that Mr. Werner said, on page 106, my question is, have you done, the last time, in the first application, you did a census in the winter of 23, December 23. Have you done a census since then? Do we even know the people that are in there? I encourage you to find out who's there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bender.
Hi, my name is Megan Wick at 436 Washington Street. I just want to make the City Commission aware that we do have a group of residents and businesses that have formed a coalition called the Community Cares Coalition. And we do have a proposal that was covered in the Record Eagle just a couple weeks ago for alternative emergency shelter, bringing the service providers together in a new location. I think this is something that really needs to be looked at, and we need to have all parties, all stakeholders involved. I do appreciate what you're doing with supportive housing, but there very much is a need to address our emergency shelter situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
My name is Justin Reed. Talking about the Pines, there are probably two things that are very interesting is the fact that we have to look into our emergency shelter to put in a different location. I've heard that before, but is that something outside of Traverse City? Yes. But I don't think the city commission has any control that anything that has to do with outside of the Traverse City for emergency homeless shelter, they do not control the townships. And the second thing is, we would love to go ahead and not have the homeless in the Pines, but you can't just kick them out of the Pines. And I've not seen anybody come up with a solution about that. The only solution that somebody has said is, well, why don't we go ahead and have ourselves a better, different location emergency shelter. That'd be awesome if it was transparent that use in the Traverse City area for any building in Traverse City would be awesome. But then again, if we put the emergency shelter somewhere else in Traverse City, the same argument is going to be, well, I don't want it in my backyard. And I think that would pretty much go nowhere, and that'd be not productive. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment at this time? Okay, seeing none, I am actually going to close out the special meeting now. We'll open up the study session. We will have the master plan, mobility action plan presentation. There is also a chance for general public comment at the end if you realize you forgot something or this sparks another conversation. But that is our last agenda item, so please feel free to stay or you can head out. Thank you.
Good evening. Sean Winter, Planning Director. I apologize for the delay. I don't think this new computer has PowerPoint.
No.
Set it up through PDF. So again, we are on our part 3 of our Master Plan Mobility Action Plan review with this, City Commission. I'm joined once again with Planning Commission Chair Debbie Hershey and Vice Chair Anna Deturi. So just a quick rundown. April into May is when the Planning Commission reviewed the draft planning documents. Towards the end of May, at a special meeting, they sent it to the City Commission for distribution, which the City Commission approved June 3rd. On June 4th, we sent out the required notices that the Act provides for the start of the 63-day public review period. Came back after 4th of July to the City Commission to discuss the supplemental portion review. We held our open house on July 18th. I had mentioned the last time I was here, we had about 100 people come through, so that was very helpful. July 22nd, we were back before you to discuss the mobility action plan component. Last week, the Planning Commission held their public hearing. They took no action on it. They did not intend to. That'll be later in the month. So today we are covering the magazine portion of the plan, with the Planning Commission looking at a resolution to potentially adopt it in August, and then it will come back to the City Commission potentially in September. So again, looking specifically at that magazine portion, as we've been calling it. So this is the prescriptive actionable component of the master plan, the mobility action plan. So there's been a lot of discussion about this planning effort and the number of pages compared to the previous plan. Well, this is really the meat of the plan, and it's about 72 pages. The previous plan was about 76 pages, so it is very similar in scale as that. Now, we did do a supplemental portion and pulled together a lot more data to have as a resource to help in the decision-making process that wasn't in the last plan, nor did the last plan include a mobility component. So that's what's causing the overall length of this. So just kind of to recap, again, master plans are supposed to be aspirational and visionary, as the great planner Daniel Burnham once said, make no small plans. But a plan does not commit, mandate, or automatically change any regulations. A plan is really intended to be a document to help you make decisions and help guide that decision-making process. So implementation would be the next step after plan adoption, where each of those action items in the plan would be carefully examined and recommendations would be coming forward through the Planning Commission in most cases as they deem appropriate. But again, a city is not tied to only doing what's in its master plan, or again, are they mandated to do anything in their master plan? I would hope we would take advantage of this opportunity in this document, but there's a whole list of communities throughout the state that tend to do very little with them. So So it will really be up to the City Commission, the Planning Commission, City Administration, and the community to help determine that prioritization, even though there are some recommendations in the action plan. So this section of the plan starts off with our 6 guiding principles. So these establish the community's values. They were developed at the beginning of the planning process to guide the work that we were doing with our consultants. So we started with a collection of statements which enshrine the community's values in our other planning documents from the past, and we put them out to the public. We had them rank different things. We started drafting guiding principle statements, took them back out to the public. So throughout this, it was a lot of iteration, a lot of reworking, all guided through the community input. So again, we use these as our kind of overarching guide throughout the document. So those 6 guiding principles, number 1 is to steward and cherish our natural resources and green spaces. 2, honor our community heritage and create a welcoming environment for all people. 3, encourage development and vibrancy in our commercial districts and corridors. 4, maintain and connect our neighborhoods. 5, encourage quality housing in locations of the city with access to non-motorized and public transportation. And 6, create safe and enjoyable transportation and recreation options year-round. So with that and everything else that we went through the plan, we created our action plan. And I've said this a number of times for the benefit of the public who's paying attention. Although a plan has a 20-plus year vision, this action plan is trimmed down to what could potentially be achieved in a 5-year timeline, because the Planning Enabling Act requires us every 5 years to review our plan and, if deemed necessary, update it. So our thought was we would keep this down to a manageable size, and then in 5 years go through that process, likely update our demographics, so we can kind of quantify how the community has changed, look at what we have done, see what we still have left to go, and then figure out what the priorities are for the next 5 years. So throughout this planning process, there was 2 main themes that we tried to weave throughout there, and that is drawing connections to equity. And so we had those blue call-out boxes throughout the supplemental portion, as well as climate change, which had the green call-out boxes. So when you look at the action plan table, you will see blue dots and green dots. So those are indicators that that action item is directly tied to the topic of equity or climate change. Then we also use those 6 logos from the guiding principles to put those in the action table to draw that connection about how those actions may be tied to the specific principle or principles. So I'm going to go through these kind of quick because they're in your document, so we don't need to reiterate them word for word. But the first talks about some specific zoning items. 1, short-term rental caps. Exploring the triplexes, quadplexes, and ADUs with duplexes and R2, riparian buffers, talking about EV-ready design standards and inclusion. So we've had a lot of conversations about how we make our parking lot standards in a way that requires possibly conduit and things like that. So as the EV market starts to grow, that it's not a huge expense later on to retrofit these parking lots, but to rather bake it into the design up front. And to reevaluate some of our auto-centric uses and see if we're really allowing them in the right locations. So these are like drive-throughs, car washes, gas stations, things of that nature. So the Planning Commission has already identified riparian buffers and short-term rental regulations as a priority this year. Riparian Buffer Committee is established and has been meeting, and Short-Term Rental Committee will hopefully be doing so as well. So related to the Mobility Action Plan, it talks about implementing near-term improvements, looking where we can improve our existing facilities to incorporate universal accessibility, looking at how our land use impacts our traffic and circulation, traffic calming opportunities, and of course the design team, which was put into effect last year already, where we can incorporate the improvements into planned reconstruction projects, and of course identify funding so we can start implementing some of these independently of planned road reconstructions. Next is ensure required accessibility standards are met within our right-of-way. Create a street improvement plan, which I believe was in last year's budget, but I think with all the transition it never really took off. But that'll help us focus in on what streets need to be replaced, in what order, and how we can start folding these recommendations into that. Next, we have redevelopment of appropriate public properties for affordable housing, commercial infill, being proactive in utilizing new affordable housing legislation such as the Affordable Attainable Housing Act and the Residential Facilities Act. We also have the Neighborhood Enterprise Zone, in addition to the changes to Brownfield and the new pilot legislation, which you all enacted last year. there's a call out there to explore ways to better manage stormwater, and the key, as you all know, is finding the funding. Since it's not a utility, we don't have a funding source for that. Identifying ways that we can decarbonize our public projects, communicate and educate on zoning and enforcement policies. We learned throughout that process that there are limits to what you can do with enforcement and zoning regulations, and it's not very well known to many people. So just making the public more informed on what we can and can't do. The use of inclusive language about residents and housing. Those who were involved in the process may have took note that there was a lot of disparaging comments made about renters and the class of people that they are, but I think it's important to note that almost half the population in the city rents. So again, we don't want to ostracize half of our population with such language. Articulate the differences between affordable workforce, market rate housing, et cetera. This is very confusing, even for people that are working in this space a lot. So what is affordable? Of course, that's subjective, but there are different cutoffs. But when we say, you know, that's 80% of AMI, a lot of people don't know what that necessarily means. So we need to be a little better at explaining these to individuals to help the public understand what some of these terms mean. Number 13 was the continued promotion of the tree fund, including private donations. Some people have donated to that, but I don't think many people know that they can. So if that's a passion of theirs, making that known. Prioritize tree planting based on established heat islands. So we did have that heat island map, so we know where we have areas where we have, as I mentioned, very low albedos. They're absorbing a lot of that material. It used to be an earth science teacher, so thank you for using that correctly. I was happy to see that phrase to help mitigate those issues. Locations for public EV charging stations. I know Light and Power has been working with the city and getting those throughout, but I know our office gets calls on that, and we just kind of defer them. We don't really have a system or a plan in place of where they should all go, so we could be a little more proactive in that way. Some additional zoning recommendations that were included to help meet the vision of the plan is, again, evaluate the existing districts and uses versus community needs. We talked to the Planning Commission recently, like C1 is a pretty much office-only district, and people don't, the demand for office use is changing quite a bit post-COVID. So there's a lot to look at in that regard. Neighborhood scale healthcare and food-related uses to ensure equitable access to these. Our current zoning, although it allows it in a number of commercial districts, but it does have some Euclidean zoning aspects to it, like our H1 and our H2 district. Like, we're going to concentrate all the hospital-related stuff over here. Well, that creates barriers to some people by not allowing it to be located near where they reside. So the 300, 400, 500 blocks of South Union rezoned to C4A, so that's the Old Town area, to make it a more natural extension. We've had, even prior to kicking off the master plan, a number of meetings with property owners in that location. And same thing with West Front Street, east of Division, so kind of between that Division and Pine Street area, where we're getting a lot of development starting to occur in there. New zoning potentially explored along 14th Street to foster vibrancy and redevelopment, as that corridor is being planned for a reconstruction in the coming years. And then building design standards for commercial developments. And again, we have a charter amendment that prohibits such standards for 1 and 2 family homes, despite the fact that we did hear that quite a bit throughout the planning process, a desire for that. Next, community and economic development hubs to support adjacent residential neighborhoods. This is tying back into that conversation about the Euclidean zoning and making more uses accessible to people. Exploring the community land trust model for affordable housing. The key there, and that's a whole nother conversation itself, is the community land trust does not have to stay within the borders of Traverse City, so it can be more opportunistic than some of the other tools. Create a climate sustainability dashboard to track progress and provide educational opportunities to the public. Increase financial support for the Arts Commission. Audit and revise the public participation plan to ensure diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging practices. Create an overlay district for priority development sites to facilitate the efficient development process. And we went over that in the supplemental portions with some of those renderings. And then maybe discuss a charter amendment to establish rental safety inspection programs. So again, here's a case where a generation or two ago made a charter amendment, which is preventing us to be proactive in what the community is calling for today. Because we heard a lot over the last year about a rental safety inspection program, which we are, again, prohibited to in the 1 and 2 family homes. So in addition to the action plan, we have the future land use map. So this establishes broad land use categories and locations. This is not like a zoning map in that zoning identifies how the land can be used on a parcel by parcel basis. These are more generalized locations, so therefore it's open to interpretation. And it's, again, a tool to help implement that 20-year development vision for the city. So each location of a specific future land use category will need to be examined by its own merits. So although we may have multiple areas for neighborhood center throughout the future land use map, what's allowed in one location may not be best to be allowed in another location based on its context. So that's where we'll have to look at things very carefully. So an example of that is 8th Street. So in 2016, the city engaged in the Envision 8th Street project, which explored primarily the redesign of the street, but also the land use on either side of the right-of-way. The plan actually called for a form-based code along that corridor. The Planning Commission engaged in that process, and once they got into the deeper level of analysis beyond the plan, they found that form-based code wasn't a great fit for that corridor. So what they did was they resigned the north side D2, which was the same as the south side. The south side was D2 at that time. But they didn't apply it whole scale as is to the north side. They rewrote the regulations and then rezoned the north side. So that's kind of an example of what would likely be happening in the future. So if you see something like a revised C2, that doesn't mean that what's allowed in C2 is what's being called for there today. It's saying C2 really by name only, but then develop the right regulations to fit with the context of that community. And in that case of 8th Street, I mean, it took over 5 years because, again, the plan does not mandate, it does not automatically change things. It just provides like a North Star as we work through these things in the future. So here's your future land use map. We have approximately 10 land use categories. I'll zip through each of those real quick. Nothing too transformational from our first one other than the neighborhood centers, which you see in that kind of dark purple, and the transitional zones. And that's intended to create a gradient in the intensity of use between what is typically higher intensity commercial corridors and then our lower intensity 1 and 2 family neighborhoods. All right, so I'll just kind of go through these. The commercial gateways, you'll notice in the plan how these are set up. You have a map for each future land use category that shows where just that land use category exists in the city, in addition to the big map. I didn't plug those in here because you'll notice there's a disclaimer on each of them that they're going to be updated at the end, because any changes to this map means changing all those other ones. So our consultants, rather than billing us for that time and time again, are just waiting for the final feedback, and then they'll finalize those maps. So I put in the color here to call out each one. With that, it has a rendering of some development patterns as well as some key characteristics. So the commercial gateway is pretty high intensity, and this is what you're going to find on the major thoroughfares kind of coming into and out of the city. So we're looking at Munson, Division, Garfield, and then East Front, and a little bit up there by M72 on the northwest part of the city. Then we get into our neighborhood centers. So again, you'll find these somewhat adjacent to the residential areas as a way to provide access to amenities within a reasonable distance, so people would be more capable of walking or biking or taking public transit because the uses that they need would be within proximity. Next, we have commercial core, which is essentially the downtown area. So it does show it going a little bit south of the river and then west of the river from where it is today. But again, that's also consistent with the last plan's future land use map. Then we have our traditional neighborhoods. So these are some of the older, more established neighborhoods where you have more of a square grid pattern for the streets. You have sidewalks, tree lawns, street parking, those kind of typical features that we see in the neighborhoods around the government center here, followed by the contemporary neighborhoods, which are, for the most part, newer neighborhoods. And these are kind of on the periphery of our residential areas. These tend to have curvilinear streets to them. They tend to be matte streets as they were designed that way, with very low traffic volumes, not a lot of connectivity through those neighborhoods, more connectivity to them. And then once you're there, you're more at that destination. Then we have our transitional neighborhoods. So you'll see that all throughout the city along areas where you have residential, in most cases, abutting commercial. Now, we were quite judicious about this, so in some places it wasn't appropriate to put that. And that's a good example. For instance, in some cases that transitional may be appropriate for allowing some commercial components. But that won't be everywhere. Like if you look at Division Street, that transitional along there probably should not have a commercial component. You're not going to be given curb cuts from MDOT along that stretch. So you'd be forcing commercial traffic through residential alleys, which is something we would want to prohibit. So maybe along that stretch, maybe things like duplex and triplexes are a more appropriate transition than, say, a commercial use. But that's part of the discussion that needs to come in the future. Then we have our innovation, production, and technology area, which is mostly the industrial. We're kind of getting around that, getting away from that term in land use a lot because much of our industrial uses are not what they used to be. They're not noxious, polluting, loud, toxic. It's more, a lot more, as the name would indicate, innovation, production, and technology. Then we get into our institutional uses. So these are some of the large land use occupiers in the city, including Munson, the Commons, the Civic Center, although that's a park, but it's not one in our system, NMC, and the airport. Most of these organizations have additional governing boards. Many of them also have a requirement that they have to have a master site plan on file with the city, and so any changes that they do have to be consistent with that. So it's like a mini master plan for that property. Then we have our public and quasi-public. These are mostly our governmental properties. So you'll notice the wastewater treatment plant, the library, the water treatment plant, the Gov Center. They're identified with that color. And then lastly, recreation conservation, which encompasses city parks and open spaces, but not necessarily all parks. We had some discussion at the leadership team. Within the neighborhoods, there's very little pocket parks and stuff. They're not called out on this map. They didn't really show up. That doesn't mean that they're not called for protection. Our charter protects the parks unless the people decide otherwise. So that's why that was not incorporated into this. And the fact that the Parks and Rec Commission and Department has its own master plan guiding that process. So. All right, then the second to last section you'll find in there is what's called a zoning plan. So this is a requirement in the Planning Enabling Act when the new act was adopted in 2008, which was actually halfway through the process of the creation of our last master plan. So Leslie, who was participating in that, they had to pivot and work these requirements in. But what it does is provide some guidance on zoning districts based on that future land use map. So you'll notice it breaks some of the city down into different areas and says, okay, this future land use category, the existing zoning is this. In order to meet this vision, you should consider A, B, and C as zoning classifications. So that'll help us. Again, it's a high-level recommendation. We mentioned that more than likely anything that would happen with districts would come with quite a few changes to the districts themselves. We may even be creating some new districts, maybe collapsing some districts like we did with the multiple family. But again, implementation will require a deep analysis in order to determine what zoning is appropriate at each of those locations in order to implement the plan. And then we have the community engagement summary. So this is just a short summary of the 3 phases of community engagement throughout this process. So it highlights the first phase, which was initiation, where we did surveys, stakeholder sessions, the open house. Phase 2 was investigation. So again, surveys. We did our sustainable tourism workshop. We did all our neighborhood listening sessions, and we did our design workshop. So this is where we were getting feedback really on specific pointed topics that we were asking the public to comment on. And then phase 3 was evaluation. So that's, again, followed up with more surveys. We had our stakeholder sessions. We had our open house in March for the mobility plan, and then we had another joint one in July. And just a reminder, a detailed report is in the supplemental portion that gets into all of this, because this magazine is supposed to be like the part that people pick up and look at if they want to know the plan. Where the supplemental portion is more like an encyclopedia. If you remember having those when we were young, you didn't sit and really read the whole thing unless you were really bored. But you went and looked to find what you were looking for, and that's where the information would be. And so that's how the supplemental portion is designed. And we will be updating that detailed report on community engagement with the survey and open house feedback from July 18th. So we've sent that all on to our consultants who are working that in as well. So it's there for reference at the 5-year review, as well as for purposes of transparency. So the last thing I want to do is just express our gratitude. We are so grateful for all the people that volunteered their time for this effort over the last year. So we had a number of members on our master plan leadership team. They include Mary Mills, Claire Carner, Janine Easterday, Ted Arnold, Debbie Hershey, David Hassing, Mai Stanley, and Mitch Treadwell from the City Commission, Colleen Pavelio, Art Krieger, Frank Deturi, Harry Burkholder, and myself from the city staff. So I just want to specifically thank Mai and Janine Easterday, because health and wellness was something that we got really into through our leadership team. It was because of their leadership and their knowledge. But Mai, I hope you're comfortable with this, but in light of her recent passing, we will be dedicating it to Janine Easterday, that chapter. So, but I want to give you credit for everything you brought to the table as well during those conversations. But Janine also quite a help on that. Also, our Mobility Action Plan leadership team, we had representatives there from TART, Norte, Beta, City Commission, Planning Commission, multiple city departments. Not listed here because they were going through some transition, but we also had Munson and the Disability Network here, so there was a kind of a revolving door of who they would send to some of these meetings as retirements were happening and things like that. I'd like to thank the planning commissioners, both current and past, especially our new ones who joined and then sat through 6 consecutive meetings of going over this every single week in a row. And then, of course, the city commissioners, both those that are seated today and those from the last commission who helped get this started. And most importantly, the public. I mean, this is the public's plan. I heard it mentioned at the beginning of July that this was my plan. I haven't written a word of this plan. So this was really informed by what the public told us through all this repeated engagement and coming back to them, working with our leadership teams and our consultants, and getting this to where we are today. It's been a long haul, but we're happy to be here. All right, so with that, I will turn it back over to the mayor in case there are any questions.
I'll open it up. Any questions at this point? Go ahead, Jackie.
I have several. I'd like to start with just a real clear understanding of the purpose of the master plan. I mean, early in your PowerPoint, you mentioned that this is the prescriptive and actionable portion of the plan, but master plans themselves are intended to be more aspirational and visionary. And I think you've been very careful to be clear that the plan doesn't mandate any changes, but do you think it's fair to say that the reason that we have a master plan is to enable and encourage change? It seems to me I've heard conversations in the Planning Commission about how having an up-to-date master plan makes it easier for developers to be able to anticipate and understand the wishes of the community up front. So to me, that seems to enable and encourage change.
Well, so let's start on that one.
Yeah.
I would say it depends on the community. All right, so I've worked in some communities that are dying for some kind of change, some economic development, some investment, something. They may use their tool for that. This plan, I don't think, our town is changing, so this is a guide to help us manage that change. So I don't think that the plan itself is going to cause any change, right? Like, it's been said a lot, secrets out. This is a very nice place, it's very desirable, and people are moving here for the same reason many of us moved here, whether it was us ourselves or our parents and things like that. So no, I don't think it's going to force top-down change in the neighborhood. It's how do we better manage that change and meet the needs of the community as we're going through this. Your second question or second part there about developers, I mean, I work with developers on a daily basis. They never look at the master plan. They look at the zoning ordinance because that tells them what they can and can't do. So that's where they're at, because for developers, honestly, time is money. And so they don't want to say like, well, the master plan says this, we could start this process. 4 years from now, this property may be rezoned. No, they want to know what they can build today. So that's where the real conversations with the developers land usually.
I'll defer to others. I have more questions, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation.
I think, Tim, did I see your hand go up too?
Yeah, is there going to be like one final read-through by an English teacher or something?
Yeah, I mean, possibly. I don't know if that person's qualified as an English teacher, but they do.
Well,
I know-
somebody that's like
Yeah,
looking
Beckett
at.
Rader has a third-party copy editor that they use,
Great.
so I'm not sure that they read through it yet. I know I read through it and I'm former
But
science
just somebody
teacher,
that's
not an English
paid
teacher.
to actually like look
Mhm.
for.
Yeah, and they
editing
do that just because
opportunities.
your eyes can be so dull and haven't
Mhm.
seen the same content,
Yep.
so that's why they hire someone outside the firm to do
Okay, thank you.
Heather?
Yeah, so I look at this old zoning map, and I see a residential city with a small downtown, well, it's kind of a big downtown, and some corridors. And then I look at the new future land use plan zoning map, and I see a commercial city with isolated residential areas. Isolated, like barriers between residential areas. And some of this may be a presentation problem, but I really think there's no getting around the fact that this is a transformational plan. This is the plan is for the future land use plan is transformational from what we have now. I see an all-in, full speed ahead, major development and population increase in this plan. What I don't see is any support for the number one guiding principle, which is to steward and cherish our natural resources and green space. In fact, this kind of commercial density is out of favor in Europe and even in the US. San Francisco, they are ripping out commercial density in the places where people work and play and live, and creating green spaces. And it's not only to make the city more livable, it's also to protect our natural resources during climate change. The commercial densification, however, isn't the biggest problem that I see in supporting this document. The biggest problem is that if I vote in favor of this document, I'm voting in favor of the future land uses on pages 62 to 65. I know it says on page 15 of the action items, it starts out with this statement, explore zoning amendments related to : and then, but the next one, which is action item A, is implementing the master plan. And that's followed by very specific call-outs to the commercialization on 14th Street, on West Front Street, on Old Town, and the zoning map language on page 60 is also very specific about implementing the changes called for on the future land use framework map. I heard Director Winter say that the city doesn't have to support all or any of these action items or recommendations, but I can't help but feel that my yes vote for the prescriptive, actionable component of this plan is tacit approval of all those future land use recommendations. And I don't support all of them. And the public that I speak with daily, regularly, does not support all of them either. Yet if I vote to approve this document, I am implicitly, if not explicitly voting to support all of those commercial upzonings on pages 62 to 65. And I also feel that if the commission votes in the majority to accept this document, it will be very difficult, if not impossible, to back away when these commercial upzoning changes come before a future commission. So I urge all of you to think very carefully before supporting this document in its current form.
Commissioner Stanley?
So I have a question regarding the City of Traverse City's process for our master plan. So at the state level, the state mandates that we have to have a master plan, correct?
Correct, if you have zoning.
So if we have zoning, and we have zoning, are we unique or relatively unique in requiring the city commission's approval of the master plan once it has been created by a planning commission?
I would say yes, unique.
So, and then how, in what way is that codified? Is that a charter amendment that gave the city commission purview to approve or not approve a master plan?
Through ordinance.
It was an ordinance. So if we want to change the ordinance so that this stays within the purview of the planning commission and does not require the city commission to vote to approve potentially the perspective of these wholesale changes that are in the master plan, that would be an ordinance change?
I'm sorry, to rescind that ordinance, giving the city commission a chance to vote on it? Yeah, you would just do that, rescind the ordinance.
And is that a simple majority vote?
That would be a question for, the city attorney and clerk's office, but I think yes.
And what happens if we don't approve? So since we currently have, it's in our purview to approve or not approve the master plan. If we were to not approve the master plan, what happens to the city then?
I don't know. I'd have to do some research and look at that.
Okay.
Commissioner Stanley.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's, the act keeps it with the planning commission. It's their primary role is the creation of the master plan. They don't require a city commission to do that, or a legislative body rather, to approve it. It gives them the ability to establish it through ordinance. And I think really the intent here is to make it non-political. It's to have an objective vision about the future. And that's why, there's limits to how many city commissioners can be on a planning commission and things like that. So, and again, every change to zoning would have to come to this board to make a description or to make a decision on it. I think Heather Shaw, a more appropriate exercise would be look at the current future land use map and this one, because looking at a zoning map and a future land use map, it's kind of like apples and oranges. So that would be my take, is look at where it called for growth in the last plan and really think about, okay, how much of that actually was implemented, because everything is going to come back to you guys to decide what you want to implement and whether or not it's true. And you mentioned climate change when we talked about that in July, is that that density is how you help mitigate that climate change, is by not having people drive from Meesick, Buckley, Kingsley to come to work every day here in Traverse City or the greater Traverse City area, because it's really vehicle miles driven per person. That's a huge contributor to that anthropogenic greenhouse gas. So that's something, all these things have balance to them, and that's where you guys are in the challenging spot of figuring out how to keep all those interests best managed.
Do we have any other questions or comments? I'm going to have Mitch, since you yielded.
Yes, I'd like to comment following up on that our current zoning plan doesn't reflect what zoning or what buildings exist in our built environment right now, nor does either our current or proposed future land use plan reflect that. Just last week, the Planning Commission ended up in a situation for a zoning amendment in Orchard View Terrace, whatever. This Housing Commission property just north of Morgan Farms in the northwest corner of the city, where there exists multifamily housing on that parcel. On Morgan Farms, directly adjacent to it, there is multifamily housing as well, yet currently our zoning code does not allow multifamily housing in either of those areas. But it has gotten built preceding a zoning change or through some other way. So this is a guiding tool. This doesn't allow or encourage more than being a guiding document any of the changes to occur that are in this proposed future land use map. I do have some complaints that I've raised multiple times before through the process, that many of the maps are factually incorrect in terms of showing a lake in Garfield Township that hasn't existed for 60 years, having inaccuracies about the northern boundary of the city against Peninsula Township, but I don't think that either of those or other small errors are going to get corrected at this point.
I don't know that that's the fine-tooth comb that will make or break this.
No.
Go ahead, Jackie. You had your hand up again for your other questions.
I have some questions about the guiding principles for the master plan. Since these formed the foundation for creation of the plan, I'd like to talk and understand more about the process. As you described it tonight, you collected statements from old plans, went through multiple rounds of revisions, and then finalized the principles through community input. Could you expand on the information about who from the community provided input about the principles and how many were folks from the general public?
Well, we had 1,910 people take the survey, and that was part of the original survey.
And that was about the principles themselves.
That's where we had the past value statements provided, and people could rank them in prioritization. You know, we had maybe 200 people come through the open house at Haggerty Center in October of '22, and we had them there in draft form, and people could provide comments. And then again, through subsequent surveys, we kept taking it out to people and bringing it back to the leadership team and things like that.
And so what did you learn from that community input, and what was modified?
You know, we've talked about it. There really wasn't anything that stood out as surprising to us. It's the values those of us who work in the community are familiar with the community having. So I don't know that there was really anything surprising about it.
I'd like to just make clear to folks, I think that during Planning Commission conversations about whether those principles are prioritized or not.
Yeah, they're not ranked in any specific way.
Prioritized,
No.
correct. So encouraging commercial development as a foundation for the master plan is just as important as stewarding our natural resources and green spaces. My question portion of that has to do with coordination with our strategic planning process. And as everyone here knows, we're just embarking on our first ever strategic planning process for the city. And that initial stage is going to involve building consensus about the city's future vision and values. If, for instance, it became clear that maintaining the character of city neighborhoods was a much higher priority in the future vision than encouraging vibrancy in our commercial districts, how would that affect this master plan and the proposed future land uses? Would it cause any changes to be needed?
No, your strategic plan would have no bearing on the master plan. It's independent of the city commission strategic plan. Strategic plan's not mandated by law like the master plan is. You're right. I mean, you're going into strategic planning with two really great resources that, as our consultant said, have had more public engagement than any plan they've ever worked on. So these are great bellwethers to what the community is valuing and seeing. You know, master plans do talk about mitigating changes and stuff like that, and managing it. So again, that's why there's not much being talked about as far as changes in the neighborhoods. It's more like the commercial corridors to serve the residents that live in those neighborhoods. So I don't think that would be at odds at all. So again, you represent the public. This is the public's plan. Now you're going to create a strategic plan on what you want to do with that information along with other things. So that is where you have to marry these things together.
Frankly, I see the potential for conflict. I see the
true.
Potential for a strategic plan coming out in a different spot than the master plan does. And I think that that would be an important thing for us to anticipate in how we deal with both of these plans that are going to be happening apparently in parallel. I also have a question about community engagement, if I can continue. Within this PowerPoint, you gave an overview of the process of community engagement. And I'd like to follow up specifically on the latest community engagement, the July 18th open house, and you were kind enough to write a memo to the City Commission on August 1st about some themes that arose. And I'm going to focus on just the issues that you mentioned that many respondents had shared, so that we're going to keep it top level. But some of the things that you mentioned in your memo were many challenge the city to take on the issue of affordability more directly. Many are concerned about growth and its inevitable impacts. Many people are concerned with maintaining the existing neighborhoods as they are and to recognize the unique character of each neighborhood. Many feel that the small town character of the city is being lost with development. Many respondents felt that newer buildings in the city, especially large-scale housing developments, are of low-quality materials and design. So with those concerns expressed at many attendees and survey takers having a chance to weigh in on those, will any of those issues be addressed with changes, modifications to the master plan?
With changes to the plan or the implementation of the plan?
Well, I would suggest that they're worthy of being reflected in the plan itself.
Well, again, many of those things are, we already talked about the neighborhoods. The plan doesn't call for really altering those. We heard from the public, because when we set out at the beginning of this process, yes, a master plan deals with change, but change also includes the conversation of what it is you value and want to preserve. And so we heard that through the process. So there isn't really much change being talked about in the neighborhoods. You will see in there that it talks about commercial design standards. So that goes to your point about maybe the large-scale multifamily. Technically, those are considered, even though they're used for residents, they're like a commercial property. Someone's getting revenue from it as opposed to just living in it. There's a landlord and things like that. So those are all the details that come working out in the future.
I would have to agree with Commissioner Shaw that when you look at the current land use and the future land use map side by side, it's difficult to see support for the idea that we're preserving the character of our neighborhoods and our city overall.
Well, and if you, Debbie, you can speak too. If you look at there, look at the yellow. Heather's got the zoning map there. You can see where it's like R1 and R2, and you'll notice the future land use map doesn't really change that. It's really the commercial corridors where it's talking about the possibility to tweak those regulations. So, I mean, that's just on the map. So,
I just really wanted to make a couple points.
come up to the microphone. Yeah, so the people at home can hear you.
I have so many things, and it's all running through my head. We had, as you've heard, much public comment, much public input into this plan, and that's how it was developed. By some of the things you are alluding to, I think I don't know, forget is the word, but we have planning commissioners who live in the city, who care about this city, who listen to concerns of you and the public, and are going to make decisions based on that. None of us are trying to build Manhattan in Traverse City. You talk about a strategic plan. We were tasked with this when you knew you didn't have a strategic plan. And it could be that your strategic plan will come out with different goals, but this is the Planning Commission's goals. This reflects what the community said, and now with the action planning items and that won't be all of the action planning items, but the ones that have been suggested are the ones that give us meat to talk about, to set goals to, and to make recommendations. They come to you. We have no power. You have the power. If a recommendation we make to you, once your strategic plan is over, is at odds with your strategic plan, you have several options. You have the right to say no. You have the right to send it back to us and ask us to rethink it, rework it, tweak it. We need to work together. And I feel there was so much. Maybe you don't think a couple thousand surveys is a lot, but if you talk to the consultants, if you talk to people who do surveys, it was a lot. A lot of people made comments. There were hundreds of sticky notes that we all read and that were transcribed that this leadership team talked about. A lot went into this, and all we are is a recommending body. And yes, this plan is supposed to be aspirational. That doesn't mean what some of the things that you're saying. It doesn't mean that any of this will happen, but you have to put some dreaming, some vision into a plan like this as we move forward. And we look in these commercial corridors, that doesn't mean it's tall buildings, it doesn't mean it's a businesses. It could have housing in there that we desperately need. And believe me, I think in your strategic plan, housing is going to come out. It seems impossible to me that it won't. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
And if I may respond, I am very impressed by the quantity of community input that was gathered. I have yet to see evidence of how it was analyzed and how it was acted upon. I'm still looking for that.
So
I had asked last time to set up an appointment to come see me. That hasn't happened yet, but you're more than welcome to, and we can go over that with our consultants.
So as everybody else has had a moment here that's raised their hand or been indicated, I wanted to chime in with a few things as we continue this conversation. I am going to take a bit of issue with this is tacit approval if we pass this. In a year and a half, there'll be totally different people sitting up here. I've sat through 6 different commissions in 8 years, between resignations, elections, everything else. So this idea, and just to clarify, because we've said that at every meeting, and we've had people still get up in public comment or come and ask me. So if we do this, this means it happens. No, it does not. If we can pass a master plan, it doesn't not automatically change zoning. It does not automatically change anything. And I think it's a bit unfair to put out there that that's what will happen. I'll even say slightly disingenuous to have these implications that, and I'm not saying it specifically up here tonight, but these implications that if this happens, it's just going to go full speed ahead without any votes, and that's what happens. I'm also going to point out that the groups that were involved in this, including again, as was pointed out, citizens, Traverse City by requirement, planning commissioners, the master plan team, which was staff and almost all, I'm checking, one person on the master plan team who wasn't a citizen, including a student. Mobility action plan, which involved all our stakeholders who sent representatives, all but one that were residents, and that was the head of that particular organization. And our own city commission that has also seen turnover since this started. Would it have been great if the city manager at the time had already had a strategic plan going, or that we had one recently? We didn't, and we're at where we are. But here's the thing: the master plan will get passed, the strategic plan will happen, and the commission will change. So both of those things could be very much disregarded depending on who's elected next. And I think that's really important for people to remember, and it's important why people should get engaged and run for office. It's important why people should be engaged and be on these boards and like Planning Commission. And Light and Power touches in on this sometimes with some of the things that we look at. All of our boards are historic districts, applies to some of our housing. That isn't in this, but that also helps to regulate our neighborhoods. There's a lot out there, including our neighborhood associations, that regulate our neighborhoods as well and bring major voices. We've heard from them on a lot of big issues. And I think that we, again, much like the conversation we had earlier tonight, I think that sometimes things can be the Planning Commission monolith or these stakeholders. They're our neighbors, and especially in this case, they are our neighbors literally. They live in our city. And yes, we are elected representatives to sit up here and say, hey, when I was running for office, this is what I was hearing. And that's totally part of how we have our decision-making process. But this wasn't just a bunch of out-of-town developers coming in and saying, this is what this should look like, and boy, won't that be great. I personally live on property that people still occasionally lament to me that it used to be a bait shop there. And isn't that sad that Traverse City doesn't have that anymore? There's housing right behind me that was city-owned, and it was a field that could have maybe been more green space, but there's award-winning Habitat for Humanity houses there now. And so, and I think the other thing that I want to point out, and this is not from anybody making this statement here, but I've heard it enough. Because a piece of property is for sale, it does not mean that it could just not be developed or not have a parking lot on it anymore or not have a house on it anymore and become green space. The city is 60% non-taxable. I want that to really be out there. It's 60% non-taxable. Part of that's the airport, Griffin. We also have, Mitch, I'm going to count on you because you correct me every time, 30 city parks?
34.
32.
32 in the city.
32 in the city, oh, plus Brown, yeah, okay. 32 in the city, in our 8.6 miles. And I'm not saying that we can't do better if we can do better. But I think that sometimes there's this idea that private property, when I hear conversations and I read certain op-eds and things, that property for sale in the city, by definition that would be affected by this master plan, will magically just become green parkland, or, you know, lamenting the loss of a strip mall for a, you know, multi-use mixed-use development. I mean, there's different things that come along with this that I think are improvements as somebody who was born and raised here and who has seen the transformation of different corridors around here. So I'm not saying that I wholeheartedly endorse everything in this, and I think that's where we have a lot of work to do as this body and whoever comes after us. But I think that this is the be-all and end-all, and if we do this, it's a rubber stamp on everything in this is very disingenuous. I've sat through many a meeting and I've sat through many a plan being presented that of a plan this big, this much actually gets done. That's been a common critique of the city. We do all these plans like your bay, your say, and they sit on the shelf. And they do sometimes, but it's not usually, like when we found out with the healthier drinking study, more gets done, but it's not always at the front either. But that's why people know when big stuff happens, is because it does come through the process. It does go through the planning commission. It does go through the city commission. It does end up on the front page of the newspaper. This doesn't happen in a vacuum, and this doesn't happen without a lot of consideration. Every other time I talk to people about what the city does, it's always the complaint it takes forever. So I'm really not worried about a speed bullet train coming through on all of this and taking our city out. That's just had to say that as a little bit of a counter. We can argue the details, we can make suggestions, we can have these bigger conversations, but just sharing where I'm seeing this, and lifelong city resident and eight some odd years up here, and that's where I'm coming from. So Heather, go ahead.
Yeah, the thing is the current master plan, the old master plan, was not prescriptive in the way that this one is. There are a couple of pages at the back with very small print saying, here's this corridor may change in the future, this is what we see may happen, we may want to consider moving from a C1 to a C2 or a, but this new master plan is very prescriptive, and not only in the future land use list of little maps of changes, but in the action items. The action items are, it says right there, we are going to do this, and we are going to do that, and we're going to do that. It's totally different from our last master plan. It's aspirational in a way that is very explicit.
Yeah, I talked with my predecessor when we started this process. That was very intentional for the 09 master plan, because the 1999 master plan was super prescriptive. And the Planning Commission, who started that process 4 years before it got adopted in 09, they felt like it boxed them in too much. So they wanted a very wide open plan. I can attest as staff and possibly as planning commissioners, it's kind of useless. It doesn't really prescribe much, so it leaves everything completely wide open. So we went down a path of being more prescriptive. And again, a plan is not an ordinance. So may and shall don't mean really anything, because you're not required to follow the plan. A plan isn't going to change a community based on its adoption. Your political will lay out regulations that may, but the reality is, guys, market forces are changing this community, with or without a plan. So do we want to have a plan to kind of direct that growth in a guided way, or do we just want to kind of let it go more free for all? And that's really what a plan helps us do, is give us direction, because, you know, even if we did nothing else, this place is going to keep getting busier and busier, right? It's not a small town. It isn't. It's not going to be Elk Rapids. It's not going to be Sutton's Bay. You have the largest hospital in all of northern Michigan that brings people here. You have large retailers like Costco. It's one of the top grossing ones in the state. People are coming from Ontario, Canada, the third busiest airport in the state, the largest community college, public school district in northern Michigan. These are all things that are bringing people here. They're things that we love living here, right? We have access to those amenities, all right? But with that comes change and growth, and we're going to have to figure out what's the best way to manage that, because there is no such thing as a static state to a community. They all change over time. And change has gotten some of our most beloved assets. We got pictures in our office. We can show you the open space from 30, 40 years ago when it was just falling into the river or into the bay, abandoned cars parked on it, broken boards everywhere. We can show you the Ironworks, which is now Midtown, or what used to be over by Hull Park. You know, change brought those great improvements. Just want to put that context to it.
I'll have Mai go, and then Tim, you had your hand up too at the same time.
So I know you were at the meeting last week. So in addition to one of the bodies that I sit on as part of my work on the City Commission is the Economic Development Corporation. And we had a very, I thought, productive meeting last week specifically about regional growth and about the value economically and environmentally of focusing economic growth in existing commercial corridors for a variety of reasons. And there's certainly things in this plan that I take exception with. You and I had a meeting last week about my concerns about Bay Street. I certainly would argue the transitional neighborhood buffer needed there. My bedroom window is 276 feet from Bay Street. This morning at 4 a.m., I was awakened by commercial garbage pickup. So I don't really think we need a whole lot more commercial development there. But I do think if we are concerned about managing the growth that is happening in our community, focusing on commercial corridors makes economic sense. It makes good sense for our environmentally. It focuses where that growth is going to happen, and it taps into existing infrastructure to do so. So I want to commend this plan for having that kind of a focus. It was very illuminating, and I look forward to seeing that happening on a regional level as well. I'm optimistic about that. That said, I think every single person in this room could find something, at least one, if not multiple things in the master plan that we don't want to see happen. And that is why an elected body is, at the end of the day, the one that would have to approve or not approve any changes to our zoning. Looking at future land use maps versus future zoning maps, thank you for pointing out that those are very different things. And I would be curious to see what the future land use maps from that very prescriptive past plan look like relative to what our zoning map looks like. So if that's something if we have another opportunity to review this, I think that could be an interesting thing, but it would also just be an exercise for my curiosity that I could dig that up on my own.
Yeah, we have them in the office. We can provide them too. And in full disclosure, there's things in this plan I don't like as a planning director, but again, it's not my plan. We had a process that we brought to you through RFP, which was somewhat unorthodox. We don't do that. Got your feedback. You approved the contract, we followed the process, and this is the product. So I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I am not going to try to direct the product from the beginning. That's not my role, and so we just roll with it. We focus on the community input. But yeah, I would agree, Mai, that was a very encouraging conversation at the EDC board.
Sorry, Tim, go ahead. You had your hand up.
So I'm going to start with what I've said at all of these meetings, but then I'll shift gears. At the start of this process, we were told that climate change was so important it wouldn't have a chapter because it would be woven throughout the document. And in my opinion, that's not happened. So I'm disappointed in that. And here's where I shift gears, because to me, that was an opportunity that's missed to meet that aspirational aspect, aspirational part of what we're talking about here with the master plan. Oh, and I should go back to say I really appreciate the conversation and all the opinions that have been shared. But to me, taking a different tact, I feel like it's missing the aspirational. I look at it and I just kind of go, meh, because it doesn't address climate change mitigation. there are a few things tossed toward it, but it's not in there significantly that it would need to be, in my opinion, to be aspirational. And then, just by way of example, as far as neighborhoods, to me, it's missed opportunity for that aspirational for neighborhoods. Like, talk to a group of neighbors standing in their front yards or their alley or both about their street, their few blocks, and what would they love to see, because that's the aspirational aspect. What would they love to see? And maybe it takes a decade to get there. Do they need more street trees? Do they want bump outs? Do they need a better crosswalk? Like, what is it? What are all those things? And that, to me, is the aspirational. Like, how do you get the citizens to feel like, wow, like that's a dream? And maybe we don't get there because it's aspirational, but then that would be something for the neighborhoods, because we reference neighborhoods throughout this, but I don't disagree that in a sense it's all about the commercial corridors, which I'm supportive of the development there, but okay, the neighborhoods, yeah, things are good. Let's just keep going. So that's why I say, like, I'm missing the aspirational part. So those are just my comments. I appreciate the conversation. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Jackie.
A couple of comments. I think we're being told, don't worry about the prescriptive things. They have to go through a lot of steps before they would ever become real.
That
You
is
know,
correct.
they'd have to be reviewed by the Planning Commission, and they'd have to be reviewed by the City Commission, and I would feel better about that if we had a strong history of things requested or proposed by planning that weren't reviewed and then almost unanimously approved by those two bodies, regardless of who's sitting on the commissions. I think that there is a culture on the commissions that has not been encouraging of questioning and critical thinking. So that's one point. Second point, in terms of resident representation on the master plan leadership team specifically, I think you need to distinguish between residents and citizens. If you look at the list of folks on the team, you'll see that virtually all except two of them are either city staff, appointed officials, elected officials, or planning professionals. We had two ordinary citizens on that master plan leadership team. And given the culture of acceptance, I am not comforted by the idea that there will be many rounds of review before anything became real.
Mark, you had your hand up.
We're just going in circles, and it's becoming a waste of time.
Well, I just wanted to point out really quick, since it was asked for some examples. We had having a lot of meetings and ending up with a similar product that it started with isn't inherently a rubber stamp, as was implied. With the zoning in the fall, there were changes made and things that were rejected at the city commission level. I see actually one of the things I was going to point out in an earlier discussion is, amongst all of this, the top priorities that have been outlined for this year by the Planning Commission, one is to re-examine short-term rentals. Tim and I were both on the commission, and I don't remember how you voted, Tim, so I'm not attributing this to you, when there was a really tight short-term rental package that got sent to us by Planning Commission 5-6 years ago, it was a little before COVID, and the City Commission said, well, no, because we need development, we're going to allow 25% in some of these if it's over X amount of units, because we figure the numbers can work out that way. So I don't agree that this is just rubber stamps and there's some cabal that's like, we just all get the same type of people get elected, because I have not served with the same type of people on any single commission. There's a lot of different opinions. Even if sometimes they arrive at the same place, they come from very different angles and have very different reasons why or why not they do something. And I think I would say that, the committee had staff on it as it should, and it had professionals on it as it should, because at no point would I like to see us get super far down the road on any project and have it be only citizen informed without some qualified people in there to help guide the conversation to productive ends. And at the end of the day, it is whether planning commission votes for it and the city commission does, or it gets chopped up somewhere in there, at the end of the day, it's staff that has to execute it. And we have a very professional staff. And I think over the years, there's been some diminishing of the qualifications of our staff. We have good staff. We have good, we've gone through the retirement discussion, and there's been some of that turnover already, and we're seeing more. We hire in good staff. We attract good people. And at the end of the day, that is their job. And, I think we can look at recent elections where some people who believe very firmly in one thing got elected, and some people who were very much against it also got elected. And I think that's more reflective of where our community is than maybe how many people sit in one room on one night and have one opinion. So I just want to remind everyone that that is part of our process as well.
And I would add that, like, the volunteer planning commissioners that are residents, the staff, the people that work for organizations, they value and love their community too. I love my community and neighborhood as much today as I did before March 1st, 2021. Just becoming a staff member didn't change my love for my community or my respect for it or my neighbors. So I do take a little offense with that dismissal that people that work for the city or work for another organization that are trying to improve our community and also live in our community are somehow not valuable for the input that they put into this process, because they volunteered hundreds of hours to be part of it as well.
And I just want to add one thing. So all of us on that master plan leadership team were citizens who were taking the input of hundreds of other citizens and discussing it. And so there was a lot of input. And the other thing I want to say was there were people with different viewpoints on that master plan leadership team, but what there was trust that it was a safe place to say what we felt and to come up with some sort of consensus. And we discussed a lot. There were a lot of differing opinions, but what guided us was all the input that we got from the other citizens in Traverse City.
Mark made the call. I'm going to put it out for final thought from anybody who hasn't spoken since Mark made the call. Okay, seeing none, thank you. All right, do we have anything to go over? Okay, then with that, as Sean's clearing out his presentation, I will open up for a final public comment. By all means, you can comment on the master plan and mobility plan. You can talk about other things. You've got your time.
My name is Susanna Tobin. I live at 502 5th Street. A big thank you for what was a ton of work and will continue to be a ton of work. I really appreciate the process. I was involved with many aspects of this process, and I will speak to the thoroughness of it, and I thank you for that. I'm also speaking as a 20-plus year commissioner on the Historic District Commission, and I can speak to the fact that everyone in this community really does care what happens. I think that there's some amazing opportunities, specifically with one of the action items in the Master Plan magazine, the action item that speaks to exploring design standards, building design standards for commercial development. What I'd like to say is that commercial development does have a broad definition. Sean mentioned that a little bit earlier tonight. Commercial development also includes multifamily structures. So I think change is inevitable. I think that people do expect growth, but they also expect it to be done well and with sensitivity. The comments that I would get as a historic district commissioner had to do with commercial projects and residential projects, and usually they were criticisms, and probably 99.9% of the time, those criticisms were about buildings that were not actually in a historic district, either in a neighborhood or from the downtown. So I know that people are paying attention to all aspects of Traverse City, and I think we have an amazing opportunity to make the change that people want to see. I don't think people are afraid of growth. They're afraid of bad growth. I myself am pro-density as long as it's done well. The city is where the density should happen. I think that aligns with climate change aspirations. And I'm excited to be involved in any future ad hoc subcommittee that has to do with building design standards as a citizen who cares about design in Traverse City and has a lot of experience in that area. Thanks.
Thanks, Susanna.
Hi, I'm Ken Richmond, 215 Washington Street. I was on the Planning Commission in 1999. I'm feeling your pain, so it's messy. I'm part of a group with Susanna that are supporting action item 16F, it used to be G, that deals with creating building design standards for new commercial and residential development. That's our interest. We'd love to see it in a 2-year period, not a 3 to 5. We'd like to see it be implemented in an enforceable way. And we just thank you for trying to help us support the building design standards. And we really want to be part of it moving forward. So we're not going anywhere.
Thanks, Ken.
Doug Kimball, 523 North Spruce Street, Traverse City resident. From page 7 in the magazine section of the master plan, and what improvements a city can make to strengthen these systems to positively influence residents' quality of life. Then, Slabtown listening session, spring 2023, question 51. People wanted single-family homes, no large box buildings, no SRTs, no ADUs, no commercial development, and maintain family environment. Question 52, slow the traffic, no cut-through traffic. Question 53, stop large buildings, keep it residential, no large-scale development, no multi-story development. It's good as it is, no weekly rentals. Spring 2024, master plan comes out, proposes change Bay Street from R1B to R2 and R3 and C1 and C2. So did the results of the listening sessions even get listened to? So how does a plan like this get so 180 degrees out of phase from the expressed wishes of a neighborhood association listening session? Well, so a master plan is said to be a view from 30,000 feet, and that's apparently how and where the decisions are made. So the message then is that we're just a spot on a map viewed from 30,000 feet to be rearranged to fit into the master plan wishes, the master plan idea of how our neighborhood should look. But it's not just a spot on the map. To us, it's a neighborhood. It's our everyday lives that could be disrupted for a generation or generations, or indefinitely or forever. It's our everyday lives that are being messed with here. And it's as if we had never said a word regarding our wishes for our own neighborhood. Darrow Park on Bay Street is a neighborhood park. It's a neighborhood-sized park. Add multifamily housing or a bar restaurant, a brew pub, convenience store, or a marijuana dispensary. Now it's no longer a neighborhood park. It can be a hangout for whatever business moves in. It'll be the same story for Elmwood Beach, a neighborhood-sized beach that would suffer the same fate. So I'm asking you to withdraw the proposed rezoning of Bay Street. And other neighborhoods should take a close look at the master plan to see what's in store for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kimball.
Justin Reed. So you've heard a lot about the master plan, on how people think that it's going to be a rubber stamp, and that, whatever the master plan gets pushed through, that everything else is going to happen on it. Well, that's not how civics work. Civics works as a guide. That's what it is. It's just a guide. doesn't mean that everything else on it's going to be everything else on it is going to be done. Some of it's not going to be done, some of it will be done. And that's pretty much with anything. With the zoning changes. That's just a part of the whole entire aspect of this guide, is that it's a 5-year guide, and that's all it is. And Traverse City is growing, and the aspects of let's not do this plan and let's just let it run wild with no plan whatsoever. That is something that can make things much more worser off than not having anything at all. Just like, for example, on Grandview Parkway, one thing that was talked about was the barriers. Is that how a barrier would create more issues? Well, what is there now? Nothing. So apparently doing something now, and will that result into a change? Probably. But it's better than nothing. And I think that it would send the message in the community that if you don't at least maybe pass this. I know today is a study session, that's what it is, but in the future, if this isn't passed, this planning, this document, this master plan, that gives the community, the people who worked hard on it, a message that, well, we'll disenfranchise from them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. I don't know that there's any other public that wants to comment. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission. Final thoughts from commissioners, go ahead.
Yeah, I let the Joint Rec, I serve on the Joint Rec Authority, and let them know at request that I would say something at this meeting. And that's about the water pressure, and it was in Liz Vogel's weekly update, so I'm really just reiterating that because it's a top priority for the Joint Rec Authority. The historic barns are in somewhat of a unique position in that they're served by city water, but not on the master meters that go into Garfield Township. They're in Garfield Township, but it goes directly through the commons, and they're at the end of a line, and so they have very low water pressure as a historical result of the different development that's gone on in old pipes, et cetera. And the reason it's a concern, it's been ongoing because sometimes there's not enough pressure to flush the toilets, and so when there's visitors, they station people in there to help flush the toilets. But there's multi-million-dollar investments that should be moving forward in just a few months in the barns. And so sprinkler systems and all those sorts of things. So just wanted to make sure that everybody, in case you've missed it, in city manager's weekly update, that everybody's aware, because we as city's taxpayers support that, so it's kind of a unique thing. Like, we can tell Garfield, like, yeah, you figure out your water issues with the city, whatever, but Historic Barnes Park is a little different because city taxpayers directly support that, as do Garfield Township residents. So not that there's an answer, but just we should be aware. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim. Any other final comments? All right, seeing none, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for a really good discussion tonight and very respectful. Much appreciated.
You didn't have to use this.
What for?